Hey everyone. So, I don't have any code snippets for you. I don't have cool tricks for typography. I'm not a designer or developer. Now you're thinking to yourself, like, what the hell is she doing here? I'm a researcher. That's all I do. I spend a lot of time getting cozy with people, watching what they do, listening to them, and this is kind of a typical look at my life, a lot of travel and talking to people. And mobile has had such a huge impact, and it's so unique on how people behave with technology that a couple of years ago, it was really hitting me from all directions. I was having all my research really becoming focused on mobile, and I had a lot of things going on in my personal life too. When I first put this talk together about a year ago, I had just given in and given my kids all the things, and it was amazing how it changed our relationships with each other, within our family, and of course I was observing them, and they're like, "Mom, don't observe me, it's creepy." And so, and now here it is a year later, and they're using this stuff, and we went out to a restaurant after a concert, and of course they're like totally on their phones the whole time, and so am I. And I'm like, oh, we should really get off our phones and actually like speak to each other and stuff like that. And I said, well, that's kind of a drag. And I said, there's this condition now called nomophobia, fear of being away from your phone. And just at that moment, our waitress leaned in and she's like, oh my God, I think I have that. And she launched into this story of how she dropped her phone in the toilet, and very appetizing at a restaurant, of course, and how, you know, this whole story about how that has changed her life for the worse, and she has to get her phone back. Also, around the same time, we were renovating our offices, and I was meeting with contractors, and contractors now have a lot of their portfolio on their phone, and so we're swiping through the phones together and like, oh, look, that's a beautiful looking wall. Oh, look how level that floor is. Oh, there's a penis. And I stepped back for a second because we were standing together looking at the phone. I was like, okay, I get it. Our phones are really personal. We laughed uncomfortably. We didn't hire that guy. But these are the kinds of things that are happening probably in your life too. And as a researcher, my job is to record these things and try out some different experiments. So what you'll see in this talk are a lot of different experiments about what people do on their phones, how they do it, how they feel about it, and trying to put all these pieces together in the puzzle. So I think that, you know, I'm part researcher. I'm also a little bit of a data scientist at this point, working with bigger data sets. And so it's always my goal to kind of bring all that together. So I made a little outline of today's talk. It's going to look something like this. You can see it looks pretty bad right there. And you guys are thinking to yourselves, I'm cutting out. I'm going to the other talk. Don't do it. I'm looking for a kind of Stockholm Syndrome effect where we're all in this together, and we're going to come out with some new ideas, some new knowledge, and maybe something that you can actually use in the future. So we know this about mobile. It's huge, and it just keeps growing and getting bigger. I love this. It's not actually a causal relationship, like a baby is born and they're like, activate the phones! That would be cool, but it's not like that. Babies do actually really love phones, though. There have been a couple studies about how babies relate to phones, and one of them, the most humorous of all of them, had somebody who's more of a brand researcher get, about 30 babies in a room, if you can imagine what that's like, and with some iPhones and, you know, Androids and a couple of Blackberries and, you know, also toys, regular kind of items. And it turns out the babies really like the phones, especially the iPhone. So Blackberry didn't go over so well with the babies. And as designers and developers, you're confronted with this, the sort of chaos of developing for mobile. So let's start by talking a little bit about the relationships that we have with our phones. It's a little bit obsessive, right? We are constantly on our phones. I think this estimate is low, actually, that we're checking our phones 150 times a day. We are spending an enormous amount of time with our phones. We're doing everything you can possibly imagine on our phones. I think some of these too, like in the bathroom, I do a lot of research with Gen Z, and that number goes up astronomically when you just look at teens and tweens using their phones in the bathroom. And I've been guilty of many of these, as probably you have too. And people are starting to use their phone as the only way that they go online. And this is for a variety of reasons, right? Sometimes it's because that's all they have. Sometimes it's because that's what they prefer to do, or sometimes it's just pure laziness. And I've definitely had lots of sessions. I just wrapped up a big research project where we're looking at a couple of hundred people and their relationships with their phones. And a lot of them were just like, it's just always there, you know? And so that's why I use it. It's just always next to me. So we're getting to this point that if it's not on your phone, maybe it's not even relevant. So I did a little experiment, first of all, with phone deprivation. So we've all kind of had this experience. Let's see if I can get this to play. No, I can't. And we have, we've had the experience of dropping our phones. We've had the experience of trying on our own to get off our phones. And so what I did is I asked people to give up their phones for as long as they could, just to see what that was like and to see what would happen. So I had about 100 people, and they really didn't last very long. I was a little shocked. 2 hours was sort of the most people fell into that category, and few people could last longer than this. And when I asked people how they felt about that experience, it really was emotional turmoil was the strongest feeling that they had when they were missing their phone. And people felt like, I can't really, this is really a part of me. It's like, I wish it was part of my brain. I can't function without this thing. It's also intensely personal. So let's do a buddy check right now. Who has their phone with them right now? Okay, hold up your phones. Let me just get a quick picture of you guys holding up your phones. That'll be cool, right? We'll tweet it out later. Yeah, smile. I can't really see any of you individually. Okay. So how many of you sleep with your phone? Not like that, but like next to your bed. Okay. Yeah, I mean, we have it with us, and we're always together, right? Our phones are there, and it knows everything about us. It knows all of our secrets. If somebody picked up your phone, I don't know what would happen, right? It's the first thing we look at every day. It's the last thing we look at. You guys are probably overachievers for sleeping with your phones, and this number may be a little low because it's from about a year ago, and it keeps escalating and escalating. And then there's that 9% that, I don't know, and maybe there's something to this, because if you're given the choice, ladies especially, it's pretty tough to figure it out. So I did another experiment. I travel a lot, as you guys saw from my schedule, and I'm constantly watching people and kind of curious, and sometimes I get creeped out, like, why are you watching me? And then I'll have to talk to them and explain what it is that I'm interested in. But I did a little experiment. I simply asked people who I saw were engrossed in something on their phone, can I just see your phone. And I left it open. I didn't, not can I hold your phone, or can I see what you're doing, or can you show me something, but just can I see it? And, so we had about 250 people participate in this experiment. And I actually had some helpers too, because I was a little worried, like, what if people just don't like me? And that's why they don't want me to see their phone, So we had a few other folks. And the answer is really this. You can't see my phone. And if you're a study participant, you're getting paid, maybe I'll let you look at my phone. But otherwise, no deal. And we're always touching our phone, right? So nobody's really done a study on this yet. I'm just starting to look at this. But the power of touch, and I think this will be interesting as wearables emerge as more of an everyday technology for us. I don't think that connection, my hypothesis is that it's not going to be as strong, because you're not touching something that you're wearing. It has a different relationship to you. Your phone is almost more like a transitional object, like a blankie or a teddy bear or something like that, that it mediates between you and the world. Or we could think of it as an awesome pet. I put it on the graph up there. So pretty low effort and a lot of fun. Dragons would be cool too. And it gives us all these superpowers, right? So we can do anything with our phone. I have so many people telling me stories about using their phones like, I would never know where I was going. I would be constantly lost without my phone. I wouldn't know what to do. I would have a question when I'm watching something, and I automatically reach for my phone to look things up. As parents, this is my daughter, by the way, as parents, we're using it more than we care to admit, right? Only about 20% of parents who have a tablet in the house don't let their kids use it to keep occupied, and I hate them. That's just wrong. No. So it is really something that we're relying on to make us feel connected with each other and with the world at large. So, okay, fine. What does that really mean for our world as designers and developers? Knowing this close emotional connection that we have with phones, it's always with us. What can we learn from that? And so what I did is aggregated data from about 65 different studies. And so because I'm in the field all the time, and obviously I can't share specifics about client research, but I'm tracking more general things at a high level across all the studies that we do. And so when I started on this journey a couple years ago, I was like, okay, what do I want to know? And it's changed over time, but just by simply identifying things that I'm curious about and tracking them, I was able to learn a lot about the mobile experience that can help. It doesn't substitute for research on your particular app or your particular site, but gives some guidelines of how to move forward. So first thing is we touch our phones a lot, but mostly in 3 ways. Anyone care to guess? The adult portion is over, so I know what you guys are thinking. It's really just the most basic gestures that most people get. And people, in the past, when I've given this, they're like, well, there's not really that much more. And what I mean is stuff like this, where you have to pull to refresh, or swipe and it means something, or people are getting a little bit better at holding to copy and paste, but we're really not there yet. And so if you want to have a gesture that 50% or more people understand, you have to get back to basics and not rely on these as primary means of interacting with a mobile app or mobile site. Obvious cues, people just don't get. Without a play button, people don't get that there is something for them to tap on, right? It's not like desktop where we see people in research sessions all the time waving their mouse around and looking for the hand, like, okay, where should I click? That doesn't happen on mobile. If it's not obvious and right in their face, forget it. It's not going to happen. They're not going to do it. So we explore very quickly when we're on mobile, and we don't use a lot of gestures typically, which is the takeaway from that roundup. Now, we can help people out a little bit by giving some kind of animated cues. In general, animations, people try to skip through them as best they can. But in some cases, it's helpful. Like here on WebMD, when we were looking at that, if you scroll through this big, long list from A to Z of 1 million conditions that you can't even imagine, at some point this hand pops up and says, listen, you don't have to go through all that. We can help you out here. And so those kinds of things can kind of get through that. We have a lot of clients talking about these first-time experiences, and we test this a lot, and I'm sure this has come up for a lot of you guys too. Like, okay, well, we have all these different gestures and things going on. Let's just put up some kind of overlay at the beginning that helps them figure it out. And the problem is that people skip past these all the time, and they don't look at these, and they don't go back to them later. And so if you're going to do it at all, it has to be so minimal, and you can't rely on it as something that people will actually use in the course of their experience. Now, there are a few kind of, new gestures that we've uncovered. One that we see all the time, I call it the flick. So what it is if you get your phone and you're quickly scrolling to the bottom of the experience, whatever it is, as far as you can get, and then scroll back up again. And we see people do this all the time, and I'm sure you can guess why people do that. Maybe. To understand what's here, what's going on, what's the scope of this thing that I'm dealing with. And so, whoops, a little glitch there. And then the other one we see a lot is what I call the washing machine. So people will scroll down, scroll up, side to side. They'll just combine the gestures that they know, which is scrolling and swiping, and try to get something to happen. And because, we'll talk about the hamburger menu in a minute, but because people don't often get that, it can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. Sometimes it's bad because they're frustrated, but a lot of times it's good because it's like, oh my God, I've discovered this whole world under here that I didn't know exists, because they're accidentally just swiping and scrolling around, and they uncover what's under the hamburger menu by accident. Okay, so again, going back to this kind of pulling together of all this research, we make up our own gestures out of the few we know, rather than learning something new. It's such a slow curve, and so I know you guys are all sitting there thinking, well, I know all that stuff, and of course you do, but it takes a lot longer for that to filter out to everybody who is using the experiences you create, and that's what we need to remember out of that. We go to great lengths to avoid typing, second thing. So we can see, I've kind of graphed people's reactions, and some people think about, oh, my fingers are too fat, I can't type. Tends to be older people because they just blame themselves for whatever's happening that's wrong. They think, oh, it's just because, of me. Most people don't anymore, though. Most people really are blaming you for the typing, and they don't want to deal with it. This becomes a big problem in stuff like online banking. In this session, we're using people's own accounts, and it was a disaster, and we couldn't get his money back for quite some time, and it was terrible. So he will probably never participate in any research again. And Braintree has put out this statistic that 40% of online banking logins fail on the first attempt because of this typing. And so what can we do? Well, people don't make it easy on themselves either, right? They're either, instead of going to landscape mode where the keyboard would be bigger, they in fact stay in portrait mode where the keyboard's a little smaller. So that doesn't help. We can't rely on people to do that. We can remember. That helps people out quite a bit. Social login, you know, there's mixed feelings on that, but more and more people are becoming comfortable with that purely because they don't have to type and they don't have to remember a password as well. And mobile wallet, we're seeing more and more of that in our research coming out, that people are adopting mobile wallet as a way to not have to type, and it has other conveniences as well. So I think the takeaway here is we want to design for typing zero, kind of like inbox zero, right? Typing zero. Okay, icons. We think that people understand what those are. And some of them they do, right? These are the ones that people mostly get. If we pull together, I don't know, this is about 1,200 people, right, that we're looking at here in this data set. So, but then it gets kind of squishy here, right? Because if you're getting below like 60% or so, you're not feeling as comfortable using those. And you think, gosh, how can people not know this? And they just don't. And it's because a lot of times these icons are not used in a standard way, right? So here you can see, that's my dog, by the way. You can see edit under the settings icon. And that confused a lot of people because they thought, oh, I'm editing the profile. It really was edit settings. But because of the context was a little different, it threw people off. And so I think that's what's happening with icons. Using words with icons can help bring it up. The hamburger menu is something that we're thinking about a lot, and I've been tracking it for quite some time. And it's one of those things that you see, like the mega dropdown, right? Remember that from like, I don't know, 5, 6 years ago, and people had, like, you'd click on something and this big drop-down would emerge, and people were like, oh my God, whoa, what is that? And they would freak out. And then after a while, people got used to seeing it, and they're like, hey, this is pretty cool. I don't have to click. And designers were all like, yeah, less clicks, right? Because we don't want any more than 3 clicks. I don't know if anyone remembers that. And so that was good. But then people got really frustrated with it. And they're like, it's so slippery. I can't grab anything in these menus. And it kind of disappeared. And so that's why when we first saw the hamburger kind of emerging, I said, oh, we've got to start tracking this and seeing what people think. And for the most part, people, I mean, it's getting better, but people don't get it right away. They think, well, that's some kind of decoration. Here's kind of what it looks like in a graph. So you can see it's leveled out a little bit as far as hamburger awareness. And, you know, I would say we're at about 75% of people get like, oh, there's more stuff under there for me to look at and get to. But that's only on their phones, right? If you take that same hamburger menu and put it over on the desktop, you know, because you're doing a responsive site and whatnot, people will totally miss it there. So this number is only for on mobile. So the other thing that we saw in this kind of roll-up of research is bottom menu aversion. And so this is kind of a big one because you think like, well, you know, all that stuff, let's just put it on, we can't put it up in the hamburger, you're telling us, perhaps, or maybe we can because it's getting a little better. We could put it on the bottom. That'll be easy, it'll be out of the way. But people aren't looking down there. Even Android users, I know, because that's, you're thinking like, well, but the Android people know, of course. They don't want to look down there. And it's maybe out of laziness, you know, people don't want to go down there, or because it's not what they're focused on and it's not what they're doing. And so a huge number overlook these bottom nav options, which is a problem. So here's, we worked with Corcoran a while back, and they made the switch, a simple switch, everything on the bottom to everything on the top, and saw their conversion numbers flip, basically, accordingly. So having the choices across the top actually put it more in people's field of vision, and they were able to, guess what, search for homes, which is kind of the main thing that you want to do on the site. we leave our sound on. So this is kind of interesting because, for me, because what research does is gets us out of our own little box, and for me, I always leave my sound off. And people try to call me, and I'm just like, don't call me, because I don't want to talk on the phone. And I won't hear it, because I have my sound off all the time. But most people leave their sound on. And so this might be a missed opportunity. I think of kids' apps where sound is such an important, crucial part of the experience. And I think maybe there's something to learn from in there. But it may be that sound cues, something that we're not thinking about a lot, but that has a lot of potential to have impact on the experience. Okay. We don't multitask very well. I kind of beg to differ with this because I think I multitask very well. But science tells us, behavioral science tells us that we actually don't multitask at all. If you want to, spend a few minutes laughing or crying, you can search YouTube for distracted walking or walking in texting on a subway platform and see many tragic videos of people falling off the subway platform while they're on their phones. We can't do both things at once. And that's maybe not necessarily such a bad thing. When we talk to people, they say, well, if I get a notification, I'm distracted, sure, from the first thing I'm doing, but I didn't care that much about that first thing, and so I'll just do the next thing. And so they just leave. And this is very concerning, to our clients, because they're like, wait a second, they're just going to leave what they were doing with us, the most important thing, and go off and do something else. But it's something to keep in mind that people do get easily distracted, and they do kind of fall off the edge of the platform of the experience. So I think the way to do this, and Jonathan Stark talked about this a little earlier too, is this kind of focusing on this one thing and really making it modular so that people can duck in and out without much consequence or feeling like they're losing their place. So making each screen sort of a standalone in a way is going to help people have a better experience with your site. The lack of back was another one that we found. So we're all really, on desktop, used to having that back button, and it's a huge crutch. And we're in sessions all the time with people, and you really have to make them use site navigation and disregard the back button. People rely on it so much. And so what we see when we're looking at mobile is that people are using the home button on the iPhone to start over, and then like reopening the app and thinking, oh, okay, I'm going to start over. And it doesn't start over. It remembers most of the time what they're doing. And so having this absence of something that people grew used to is a huge tragedy. And it's interesting because, as I mentioned before, I'm doing a lot of research with tweens and teens, and I wondered, like, well, does this affect them? Because they're not growing up as much with a desktop experience as they are with, say, a tablet mobile experience. But in fact, they're having kind of the same thing. I think whether you frame it as back or whether you frame it as, I need a way to just start clean, because I remember my starting point. I don't remember all that stuff in between. I don't remember even where I ended, which is really interesting because a peak end rule almost doesn't apply with online experience in a way. But I remember that start point, and that's what I need to get back to. So I hear lots of comments like this, like, well, that didn't work. I guess I'll just move on and hope for the best later. And, a small number are going to the bottom and trying to do this and go back. But remember, they're not looking at the bottom very much, so we're not catching those people. So there's some way to address a do-over, whether it's a back button or something else, is really what's kind of needed in the next generation for our phones. Multiscreen is something that we look at a lot. I do a lot of work with entertainment, and they're looking at TV, but also in work environments, we're looking at a desktop computer and the phone. And there's always this sense that the big screen is the primary screen, and the little screen is the secondary one. And we kind of came up with the opposite hypothesis in our research of like, well, what if the small screen is actually the primary one? And what we found, and this is all linked in again with like people's emotional connection with their phone and how we're touching it all the time and how it's constantly by our side, is that people are concentrating on that, the object in their hands that's closest to them, rather than the one that's far away. That's actually getting more of their attention. So I don't know if we're at this point yet, but certainly the relationship that we have with our phone is really defining that. And then finally, we expect a little bit of magic when we're on mobile, and we see this a lot. I just want to kind of give us a historical concept. Remember when talking on the phone without a cord was like really, really cool? And you know, it got smaller and smaller, and then really, really small, and that was magical. And people are still looking for that magic with their phone, and they find it. Things like this, where we're doing research with a financial services company, and they have mobile deposit. And people at the beginning were like, no, mobile deposit, no, I'd never do that. I mean, like, what do I do with the check? You know, how's that even gonna work? How's it gonna go to the bank? And then they saw it. They're like, whoa, this is incredible. Don't have to enter in a credit card to pay. I don't have to enter in a check. Typing 0, right? And so it's got that kind of magical property. And showing location awareness. Again, like we're too deep inside. We're like, yeah, of course our phones know where we are all the time. But people are struck by that. Like, oh my God, it knows where I am, especially if it knows everything around you that's happening. It feels like a new, magical, unique presence. Of course, there's a balance, right? It can't be creepy. It can't be showing you like what everyone's doing next door, except maybe if it's anonymous, that might be okay. Banjo is not, though, so this kind of ranges on the creepy side. So it's that one unexpected surprise that sometimes keeps people engaged with that relationship that they're having with your site or your app. We expect it to be better than desktop, and hear this a lot. People are so glad that ads aren't quite the same on phones as they are on the desktop. They're hoping nobody will figure that out, and probably somebody will, you know, of course, and wreck it. But people are very quick to judge these things. And so I think taking all this into account is going to help us really understand some kind of basic framework. But I'm going to ask you guys to go out and try your own experiments and to do your own research, because these are general guidelines, but this really doesn't get you to the point of learning about your app. So I usually try to do some kind of pledge at the end of my talks because I feel like it bonds us all together. So I'm going to make one up right now. Raise your right hand. Repeat after me. I do solemnly swear that I will always test with the power vested in me as speaker. I pronounce you an awesome audience. Thank you very much. And we